All right, we are live and we're looking into the Silicon Valley Daily channel on Forecaster. Let's look at it. 20 members, 1.1k followers, and I believe they are not letting anyone in now. It is just these 20 members. Who are these 20 members? It is Dan Zinger, Zach, Brian Wodge, Nicholas, Zach, July, Rish, Ted, Jason, AGM. Okay, perfect. This is it. And this was spent Ben Evans. Annual presentation is always good. Food for thought. AI eats the world. This was 7 months ago. All right. Every year, produce a big presentation exploring macro and strategic trends in the tech industry. New in May 25. AI eats the world. AI is whatever machines can do yet. Can we find this on YouTube? Ben Evans, AI eats the world. Okay, perfect. Is this it? Yes, this is it. Super AI.
So I was asked to come and explain AI again at Super AI, and I always think a good place to start if we want to understand this is to ask, well, what is it that we mean when we say AI? This is, I think, a really important observation from 1970 from Larry Kessler, who was an AI scientist, that AI is whatever machines can't do yet. Because once it works, we say, well, that's not AI anymore, that's just software. AI is the stuff that doesn't work yet, or maybe that's only just started working. And if we think about the history of this,
AI seems to mean whatever just started working, or maybe whatever almost works. Database, machine learning, LLMs.
in the 1970s, databases had so much human memory, and people made movies about how databases were going to take over the world. And today, databases are software, or indeed legacy software. And 10 years ago, machine learning was AI. Today, I think machine learning is just software. I would guess probably
Machine learning is just software.
half the people in this room would say it's still AI, and the other half would say, no, now it's just software. You use your phone, you take a picture of your child or your dog, and you can search for it. And 15 years ago, that would have been witchcraft, and
Just for other people to find it easier. I'll just comment over here. Video.
years ago it was AI, and now it's just software. And today we have large language models.
It seems like it didn't show up. Is the comment section working? We don't know.
And generative AI, whatever we want to call it, and maybe this is AI, or if you're Sam Altman trying to get out of your Microsoft contract, you will say it's super intelligence. For everybody else, is this AI, or in 10 years' time, is this still just going to be more software? Now,
In my lifetime, I've seen two demonstrations of things that struck me as revolutionary: the GUI, the GUI, and ChatGPT.
I think we don't know yet. Bill Gates here 2 years ago, 3 years ago, saying, well, in his lifetime, this was the biggest thing he'd seen since the graphical user interface. So Bill is suggesting, no, this isn't just more software, this is something else. Sergey Brin,
The final race to AGI is afoot.
co-founder of Google, saying something similar, that we're on the track to AGI, that no, this isn't more software, this is something else.
So the next platform shift: mainframes, PCs, web, smartphones, generative AI.
And so if we think about the progression of technology over the last 50 or 60 years, we've tended to move in cycles. So we have a platform shift every 10 or 15 years. We have mainframes, and then we had PCs, and then the web, and then smartphones, and you could put other things on here. You could put databases or client server or open source. And each of these pulled in all of the investment and innovation and company creation. The old thing is still there, airlines still run on mainframes, banks still run on mainframes, but the new thing is where all the innovation, all the investment, all the change, all the company creation happens. And so the view is that now this is the next platform shift. Generative AI is the next thing after smartphones, after the web, after PCs. But there's also a view that says that, no, this is something fundamentally different. This is breaking the cycle. It's much bigger change than that. It's something more like electricity or computing.
matters in tech? What mattered in tech this week? Okay, maybe we'll dive into Benedict Evans in this video.
Or fire, or like the next generation of humanity, or something else. And out of that, I think you get a range of possible outcomes. That it might be that
Just more software, thousands of models. How far will this keep getting better? One world computer controls everything. Oh shit! This is actually very interesting. One world computer controls everything, because it's like, what is self-driving cars like? What is at the end Waymo? It is just like one computer. It is like a hive mind. There is just one computer, and all these vehicles that are on the road, they're constantly collecting data. They are individually going through their own personal experiences with customers, with roads, with all the road rules, and then all that data, all that feedback goes back into this hive mind. This hive mind is trained, and then it again spreads it out to everybody. So basically what we are moving towards is one world computer, with specific context. Like right now we have everything on ChatGPT. What is ChatGPT? ChatGPT is like one hive mind, and everybody who pays like $20 per month, they have access to it. And now all the user context, all the user details, all these queries, where it's breaking, where it's not breaking, all that data goes back into the hive mind. The hive mind trains, the hive mind keeps getting better, and then it again sends to everybody. So what is going to be unique is what's going to be unique is the personal user context, the personal user data, while it'll be just one computer, one world computer.
this is just more software, that there will be thousands of models, just as there are thousands of databases or thousands of spreadsheets, millions of spreadsheets. And then at the other extreme, it might be that we'll have kind of one giant world computer that runs everything. And you can go to it and say, like, how do I move to Singapore? Or how do I buy a house in Hong Kong? Or how do I do my taxes in 5 different jurisdictions? And it'll just do it for you. The thing is, we don't really know what's going to happen there. And we have a range.
In from 3 to 8 years, we will have a machine with general intelligence of an average human being. So we have that. AI is whatever machines can do yet.
Possibilities and a range of opinions. And it's important to understand we've kind of never quite known how this is going to go. So Larry Tesler on the one hand said AI becomes just software. On the other hand, Marvin Minsky at the same time said that in 3 to 8 years we'll have a machine with the general intelligence of a human being. And he was right. In 3 to 8 years we'll have a machine with the general intelligence of a human being. And he may always be right. Check back in 3 to 8 years and see. We'll find out. Either the machines will be treating us as pets, or this will have become software again. And so if we look at conversations that are happening,
Two kind of conversation. This is something, but it might be everything. What's going on right now? Two kinds of conversation. This is something, but it might be everything. Model building plus software deployment. This will transform humanity.
In the tech industry now, there are these two very different ways of looking at it. On the one hand, you have people saying this is going to transform humanity, this is going to change the nature of society. But on the other hand, you have people taking these models and making them faster and using them to transform the reconciliation of overdue invoices inside large telecoms companies. So you have this kind of widespread possibility, and I'm mostly going to talk about the first of these. So let's talk about model building. ChatGPT dropped 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, and what's happened since then? We have much more
23 December, I believe.
Capital. We have pricing collapse. We have lots of
Much more capital, pricing collapse.
new exciting stuff, lots of buzzwords, lots of acronyms, lots of new terminology and jargon. We don't appear to have any obvious moats. There don't seem to be any winner-takes-all effect, any barriers to competition, and we have huge...
Much more capital, pricing collapse, lots of new stuff, agents, multimodal reasoning, MCP, etc. No obvious modes, open source.
Open source. If we first look at that surge in capital, the big 4 platform companies last year spent about $220 billion building infrastructure.
This is very interesting. It kind of like moved all these big tech companies to actually understand that, okay, you became a $1 trillion company and you had so much cash on hand, you didn't know yet what to do, but finally you know. Now you know the new race is on, and the one who doesn't invest gets wiped out. So you better start investing.
This year they've said they'll probably spend something over $300 billion building data centers. So we've got more than doubling of the investment of their investment in infrastructure in order to build platforms to make this work. It's interesting looking at Microsoft. I'm old enough to remember when Microsoft's business was putting a $1 CD in a $10 box and selling it to to you for $250. Now Microsoft is spending over 30% of its revenue on CapEx, which is double what a typical telco spends. So we've got this enormous surge of investment. A large portion of this, as we know, is going to NVIDIA, whose chart is still going up and to the right, as the caption says. This is also a contract manufacturing chart. And so NVIDIA is now doing over $45 billion a quarter selling AI chips into the data center industry. But what all of that investment has produced, by and large, is a bunch of models that look kind of like commodities. When ChatGPT launched, they were the first ones out there. Nobody else had a model that was anything like as good. Today, there are lots of people who are making models.
Oh, December 22, sorry. December 22. Wow.
That are pretty much the same level of quality. Sometimes they're an hour ahead, sometimes they aren't. But there's a lot of models. Indeed, I think what DeepSeek proved 6 months ago, DeepSeek just kind of proved the point that anybody with $500 million can have a frontier model. And $500 million isn't nothing. Only a few people in this room have $500 million in the bank. But the tech industry is a big industry. There's a lot of big companies. There's a lot of people who can afford to invest that kind of money if they really want to. On the other hand, what's happened in parallel to this is that the models themselves have become much cheaper. So we have an order of magnitude, maybe two.
An LM is the most expensive and fastest depreciating asset in tech history.
Orders of magnitude decline in the cost.
Price per MTOK for model equivalence.
To produce a given result. Every year, this is an observation someone's made that LLMs are both the most expensive and the fastest depreciating asset in tech history, possibly any history. If you kind of step back from all of this, we've got all of these acronyms, all of these charts, all of these measurements, all of these benchmarks. This all looks very like the PC industry 20 or 30 years ago. These are a couple of examples I found online. 191 of the fastest 486.
100 of models, dozens of benchmarks and acronyms. MTOK replaces megahertz.
PCs, which would be sort of sometime in the early 90s. 19 of the fastest 56K modems. And there was a time when you had to know what all the acronyms were. You had to know how many megahertz and how many gigabytes and what chips you were buying. And then it all got abstracted away and you didn't need to know. You had this wave of furious competition and then it got abstracted away and the value moved somewhere else. And that's probably what's going to happen with this stuff as well. It all becomes commoditized and the value moves somewhere else in the stack. It's also worth pointing out, though, that although having the models themselves seem to be commoditized,
the models may be commodities, but ChatGPT is the only AI brand with consumer awareness. This is starting to change. Okay, we have names Gemini and Claude over here. But this is true. This is true. Among the tech people, they know a lot, obviously. But if you look at the general audience, obviously ChatGPT carries the name.
Consumer awareness doesn't look like a commodity.
Carries the mainstream awareness.
Commodity. So here we have a model score versus App Store rank and Google Trends. Perplexity, which gets a huge amount of buzz in the industry, doesn't even rank on either of these charts.
Oh, wow.
It does seem like ChatGPT is on.
I think so. Oh, wait, 3 weeks ago? If this is 3 weeks ago, was this just posted 3 weeks ago because they were super late, or was it also recorded 3 weeks ago? Recorded on 18th June 25. Okay. So maybe he came up with this presentation and now he recorded the video. Okay, very interesting. And it's funny, like Google can now quickly look at that this video has mentioned people, Bill Gates, Sergey Brin, Steve Jobs. Then you can show the transcript as well. Okay, perfect. Transcript is here.
On the way to becoming a verb in the way that Google became a verb. On the other hand, it may be becoming a verb on the way that MySpace became a verb. The differentiation appears to be in what you build on top, not on the engineering and the technology, at least at this stage.
But what does this mean for the rest of us? Massive investment and FOMO in tech. Models getting better and cheaper. Models are commodities for now.
So if we pull those threads together, like what does this mean if you're not an NVIDIA shareholder, if you're not a TSMC shareholder? Well, there's an enormous amount of investment, an enormous amount of fear of missing out. The models are getting better and cheaper, but the models seem to be commodities. And for anybody else, the models are just there and available. You can download them, you can run them on a Mac. value moves somewhere else, the value moves up the stack. And that gets, I think, to the kind of the more interesting set of conversations, which is around deployment. Like, what do we do with this? How do we use this? How does this get used? What do we spend on it?
Traditional software, deterministic tasks that are easy to explain to a computer, machine learning. Probabilistic tasks that are hard to explain to a computer, LLMs. Probabilistic tasks that are easy to explain to an intern.
And whenever you have a new technology, there's a set of puzzles around what is it that this is, how does this work, how do we understand this? And I think there's a kind of a useful way to think about generative AI is that traditional software is deterministic, it follows logical steps, it does things that are easy to explain to a computer. It's easy to tell a computer how you calculate a mortgage, it's hard to do it in your head, but it's easy to tell a computer how you would do that. What machine learning did was move this to a statistics question, to move this to a probabilistic model. And machine learning solved things that were hard to explain to a computer. Like, why is that credit card transaction weird? What does this Chinese word mean in Malay? What does this Japanese sentence mean in English? Why is that a picture of a cat and not a dog? Why does our robot keep falling over? And so machine learning solved that. Large language models, again, are probabilistic, and it seems that what they're good at right now is things that would be easy to explain to a person, things that would be easy to explain maybe to an intern. Anything where you could ask a human to do this for you in 10 seconds and they would come back with it the next day, you can probably ask an LLM to do, and it will give you an answer. Anything where it would take you a half-hour meeting in order to set up the project and you need to give a bunch of context and have a bunch of questions, LLMs probably fail at those, not because they can't do the task, but because we can't explain the task. It's hard to explain. All of that kind of gets us to these questions that every big company is asking now is, this all sounds very cool, but what is it that we do with this? Is this something that computers could never do before, except that they might get it wrong because it...
That sounds great, but what specifically can we do with tech that can automate things computers could never do before if the tech might get it wrong?
Statistical probabilistic system. What do we do with this? How do we use it? What happens when you open ChatGPT and you have this blank screen and you don't know what to ask? If you...
Blank screen problem. What do I want? How do I ask, control, steer, explain a trade? What kind of errors are okay? Where do we put the human in the loop? Blank screen problem. What do I want? How do I ask, control, steer, explain a trade? What kind of errors are okay? Where do we put the human in the loop?
Feedback isn't quite what you wanted. How do you fix that? How do you deal with the fact that these models have a probabilistic answer, and so the answer will not always be exactly correct? Where do you put the human in the loop? What's the right way to use this to build software? At a very kind of conceptual level, I think...
Do we use LLMs to control all of our traditional software? Or are LLMs just another API to build software? Do we use LLMs to control all of our traditional software? Or are LLMs just another API to build software?
It's interesting to ask, do you use the LLM to control all the other software? So you let the LLM talk to Oracle and Salesforce and SAP and get answers back and tell them what to do. Does the LLM sit at the top of the stack? Or is the LLM just another API and Oracle or Salesforce can use a Claude API to do some sentiment analysis or to draft you an email, but all of your source of truth and all of your fundamental control should sit in your traditional software? The answer to that is probably...
Interesting. It's going to go both ways. It's going to go both ways.
Probably yes, depending on what you're trying to build. But if we step back from this and step back from kind of the AI bubble of everybody who's using this all the time and talking to everybody else who's using this all the time, it's kind of important to remember that most people are kind of puzzled. So this is a bunch of survey data that I pulled from the end of last year on how many people are actually using a generative AI chatbot, and I've very carefully used that definition so that you're not capturing people who've taken a picture in Snap and put a cool filter on it. And the answer is that sort of something between sort of 7, 8, 9, 10% of people are using this every day. And another kind of 20% of people are using it maybe once a week or every 2 weeks. And then probably double that used it once and thought, I have no idea what to do with this. And this is kind of a really interesting kind of statistic because it says there's a lot of people who use this, understand it, get it, they've got the account, they go to the website, and it's useful maybe once a week. But that isn't what you hear from people who think this is going to transform humanity. If it's going to transform humanity, why is it something that I use every week rather than something that I have open all of the time? If we look at how enterprises are thinking about this, you get a slightly different picture, which...
Corporate hesitation for enterprises use cases are easier to see, but implementation is hard. Security, privacy, expertise, error rates, ROI, unclear, data not ready, intellectual property rights regulation, use cases.
It's the kind of the series over on the right here, what do I do with this? That's the lowest, that's not actually a big reason to hesitate. The real reasons to hesitate are, well, we get it, but it's hard. We We have to worry about security, we don't have the in-house expertise, we're worried about the data rates, we haven't got our data in order. It's actually more difficult to deploy this, even if you can just understand what the use cases might be. Now, however, I think it's kind of important to remember that the future always takes time. This is a chart I love of enterprise adoption of cloud, and if you're in the tech industry, cloud is kind of old and boring and done, and it's a thing from the 2000s, but it's still only sort of 20 to 30% of enterprise workflows. And the CIO is always desperately hoping that they'll get the CFO to give them budget to re-platform in 3 years, but they never actually manage to get budget. It does actually take time to deploy new technology, and we should remember, like, LLMs didn't exist 3 years ago. It takes a while to build software, and then it takes a while to get people to deploy it, and we should expect this to take a bit longer. And indeed, we should think that more generally about any new technology, that we have these kind of questions with every platform shift. I was a baby analyst when 3G was the big thing, and analysts and investors would keep saying, well, what's the killer app for 3G? What should we do with 3G? Why would consumers buy 3G? And the answer was that having the internet in your pocket was kind of a big deal, and smartphones replaced PCs. The same kind of questions came up with the cloud, like only an idiot would trust Amazon or Google with their data. And the same kind of questions that come up now with LLMs, so this is kind of weird and strange and different, and we don't know what to do with it. But then it's always weird and strange and different, and we don't know what to do with it. So maybe actually we should step back and think, well, what's the standard pattern for how...
So make it a feature, automate obvious use cases, innovate new products, bundling and unbundling, disrupt, redefine the question.
...deploy new technologies. And to begin with every new technology, you absorb it. You make it a feature, the incumbents add it to all of their existing stuff. You use it to automate the obvious, easy things where you can see that would be useful immediately. You do the early, obvious stuff. A little bit later on, then you start innovating. You start thinking of new things that you could do, new things that weren't possible. You move from bottom-line innovation to top-line innovation. Startups get founded that unbundle the incumbents or unbundle existing business models. And every now and then, there's a third step where somebody actually disrupts the industry, changes the question, asks different questions, and creates Airbnb as opposed to putting hotel bookings online. But that takes longer again. I think
Basically, 20 hours of work for some people and turned it out in 15 minutes. Now imagine lawyers seeing it. That's very clever, but I don't have that use case.
Kind of a useful way to understand this is to go back and look again at the platform shift, which is to look at spreadsheets. Which some of you may have heard me talk about this before, but I always think it's a really useful thing to look at. This is VisiCalc, which was the first successful software spreadsheet in the late 1970s. And before this, spreadsheets were paper. You could buy paper spreadsheet. And so with VisiCalc, you can change the interest rate here, and all the other numbers change. And if you're an accountant in 1978, you would see that, and that would transform your life because it could do a week of work in an afternoon or in 5 minutes. But if you were a lawyer and you looked at this, you would think, well, that's great, but I don't have that use case. I don't do spreadsheets. My accountant should see it, but I don't do that. And that's kind of the stage we're at today with LLMs. There's a bunch of people who look at this and say, I have that use case. So we're already...
Immediately, obviously useful for some professions and some workflows, coding. Errors easy to see, 30% plus efficiency gains already. Marketing, errors easy to see, many possible answers. Customer support, use with caution. Early adopters, always invited market.
Seeing huge adoption in software development, we're already seeing huge adoption in marketing. There's a bunch of people very excited about this in customer support, although you kind of have to be careful because it will tell you what the answer looks like rather than what the answer is. And you see a lot of adoption in early adopters, probably many people in this room, which to me looks a lot like people who use Notion or Airtable or any kind of no-code tool. There's a certain kind of person that has a certain kind of job, a certain kind of task, a lot of flexibility in how they do that. They're looking for new ways to do that. And so those people are all using ChatGPT and Claude and Perplexity and Gemini and Copilot. But for everyone else, there's kind of puzzlement. It's not clear what we would do with this. It's worth it, certainly, I think there's kind of double tapping on software development. It does feel like even if nothing else happens, using AI to generate code is kind of the new AWS in that this is
Fastest growing, most profitable in fund history because of AI.
the new step change.
Vibe coding as a new abstraction layer after AWS libraries, operating systems, a new step change reduction in software creation.
In what it takes to get software out of the door, how quickly you can deploy software, how quickly you can build software companies. But for everyone else,
It's not the customer's job to know what they want. It's our job to show it to them.
there's this sort of puzzlement. What do I do with this? Where we have this canonical quote from Steve Jobs. It's not actually the customer's job to know what they want. It's not the customer's job to know what this new technology is supposed to be useful for. It's our job. It's the software industry's job. It's entrepreneurs' job. It's CIO's job to work out what you would do with this. One part of that is that you go to someone like Accenture.
Digital transformation, dig into boring back office processes and look for things to automate.
You go and you build new software in the enterprise. The CIO and the consultants work out the new tasks that you could do with this. And so Accenture booked 1.4 billion of generative AI bookings, reported 1.4 billion of generative AI bookings last quarter. There's probably a little bit of AI washing in that, as every CIO and CEO wants to say they have an AI strategy, and every Accenture engagement manager wants to report this as generative AI rather than legacy software. But that kind of reflects how enterprise software works.
Startups create use cases and unbundle incumbents.
The other extreme is that startups create use cases. This is some examples of startups that are using LLMs in order to solve very, very specific problems deep inside enterprises, like converting COBOL code into Java, reconfiguring telco billing systems. This isn't the future of humanity, it's just more software, but it's still really useful. And so if we look at those startups coming from Combinator and Silicon Valley, basically all of them are AI startups. Every big company, in the same way, is looking
Everyone has a pilot.
at this, experimenting.
Software, customer service, marketing, knowledge workers, operations, IT, finance, sales, HR, legal.
Building pilots, sometimes moving those pilots into production, sometimes not, mostly concentrated in software and customer service, but again, it's kind of early. And
The future can take time. A quarter of CIOs have launched something, but 40% don't plan anything until at least 2026. CIO expected timing for first LLM projects in production. Already deployed at least one project.
of course, it's always early. So this is what CIOs expect to deploy, already have deployed. Typically, about a quarter of big companies have got something deployed now. Another 40% don't expect to do anything until next year, maybe longer. And that's kind of always how it works. You go through
Platform shifts mean more tools. Mainframes, one app, PCs, dozen of apps. Web mobile, hundreds of apps, LLMs, what else can we automate?
these platform shifts, and you go from having one app to dozens of apps to hundreds of apps, and you automate more things with every step. And so that gets
Is this a CI question, CFO, CEO? Is this an Accenture question or a Bain, BCG, McKinsey question? Is this top line or top bottom line change or disruptive existential threat?
to this question, well, what's our AI strategy? What should we do with AI? And the answer is, well, what kind of question are you asking? Is this a business process optimization question, or is this a kind of fundamental existential threat to your company? And the answer is yes, all of the above. Existential threats to your company can look different. We always talk about Uber and Airbnb as redefining what a market looks like. It's quite interesting to compare what Uber and Airbnb actually did. Uber demolished the existing taxi industry. Airbnb was kind of mostly additive to hotels because it was such a different product. So disruption can look different to different industries depending on the technology. We have a lot of those kind of questions now with LLMs, and particularly with search.
What's a good chocolate chip cookie recipe? What should I cook with this?
The question people always ask is, what happens if I go to Google or ChatGPT and just get the answer instead of doing a web search and getting a bunch of links? How does that change the internet? The more interesting question to me, I think, is, well, what happens if you just completely change the question? So what I've done here on the right here is given ChatGPT an image of my fridge and said, what should I cook? That's not a Google query. That's not something that would produce links. That's changing the nature of the question and how we think about what this might be. And of course, that's also redirecting $1 trillion of annual ad spend, half of which currently goes to Amazon, Meta, and Amazon. Google, Meta, and Amazon. If we change how the internet works, if we change what you mean when you ask a question or you search for something, then all the money moves. And there's a whole bunch of places where this is going to change things.
How does AI search and discovery change retail? What will AI-enabled robotics do to logistics? How will AI video generation change Hollywood?
We just heard about robotics. The interesting thing, I think, that I took away from listening to the robotics conversation is there's an AI question here, but these are mostly logistics questions. What do humanoid robots mean for logistics? Ask a logistics person. What does AI mean for Hollywood? Ask a Hollywood person. The tech industry changes the industry, and then everything else changes around it. So just some concluding thoughts, and then I'll give up for time. After 2 or 3 years talking to AI at events like this, it strikes me that all AI questions have one of two answers. The answer is either it will work like every other platform shift. Should we go with Microsoft or Google or a startup? Should we hire Accenture or Bain? Well, how did you do it the last 5 times? The other class of question, no one really knows the answer. And that's also the way every platform shift worked. This is a chart from a diagram of the early internet from 1995. No one knew how this was going to work. No one knew that it was going to be the internet. No one knew that the internet was going to be the web. No one knew that the value capture in the web was going to be in search advertising and then in social. We're kind of in the same place now with LLMs. We know there's going to be some AI stuff, but we don't know the market structure. We don't know how it's going to work. We don't know where the value capture is going to be. We don't know where the money's going to be. Meanwhile, all the other stuff we were excited about before this is still there. So e-commerce is now 20 or 30% of global retail. Google actually has autonomous cars working, maybe. And so all the stuff that we were excited about before is still there, and all the stuff that we were excited about for the future.
Dreams of 2005, e-commerce streaming SaaS workflows, 2025 generative AI. Dreams of 2030, XR crypto, robotics, space, quantum nuclear, comp AVs.
So now we have crypto and robotics and space and nuclear, but meanwhile most of the rest of the economy is being disrupted by ideas from 15, 20, 30 years ago, ideas like e-commerce and streaming and SaaS and workflows. So we have this kind of progression across the tech industry that we're always excited about the things that are going to happen in the future and the things we're building now. Years ago, ideas like e-commerce and streaming and SaaS and workflows. So we have this kind of progression across the tech industry that we're always excited about the things that are going to happen in the future and the things we're building now. But all of the money, the trillions of dollars of revenue, is in ideas from 20 years ago, and that's probably how it will always be. And with that, I will say thank you. Here's the things we're building now.
From dreams to deployment, what's already big, what's being built, and what comes next? What's already big? E-commerce, streaming, SaaS, workflows.
But all of the money, the trillions of dollars of revenue, is in ideas from 20 years ago, and that's probably how it will always be. And with that, I will say thank you.
Probably, bro. Wow, he should have expanded on that idea. He just dropped the most interesting idea without any further elaboration. Okay, perfect. Yeah, this was also interesting. Time to buy more cloud-first stock. Let's look at Benedict Evans. In July 2025. What matter in tech this week? Choose your subscription, premium, free, subscribe for free. What people say. Delayed by 2 days to Tuesday. Read a sample. This is from 2002. Why would Benedict Evans give you something to read from 2002? Let's subscribe and let's see. No. We don't get anywhere. Alright, Benedict Evans, what matters in tech? Essays, AI metrics. The real platform should we want to measure the growth, but we are confused about what to measure. That's partly a problem of data and definitions, but it's really a question about what this is going to be. Okay, this makes sense. Like, why, if I had an agentic browser, I would be able to just right over here, I would be able to ask it that, hey, summarize the key points from this article. Do chatbots have product market fit? Who for? Monthly tokens processed. Hence, the real question, as I've hinted at a couple of times, is how much LMs will be used mostly as actual user-facing, general-purpose chatbots at all, or whether they will mostly be embedded inside other things, in which case trying to measure their use at all will be like trying to measure machine learning or SQL. Conversely, we're also wondering if LLMs will hit Google's query volume. A casual comment for Eddie Q earlier this year spiked Google's share price or accelerate the smartphone refresh cycle or change e-commerce buying behaviors, and what the metrics for SEO for LLMs. Stepping back, Eric Schmidt told Sheryl Sandberg that when you are getting on a rocket ship, don't argue about which seat, and there's certainly a rocket ship. The Occam's razor is that in the end, all of these metrics resolve to money and time. But the fuzziness today also reflects how early and unclear all of this is. We don't know what the business and the products will be yet, and the right metric will be shaped by that. Mary Meeker's 95 report forecast email and web use separately, and she thought email would be bigger, which wasn't really how this worked. I think charts comparing generative AI user growth to things like the internet of smartphones need some caution or context. The original Macintosh started at 7,850 and the original iPhone at 800. Where generative AI is just a website or an app as far as the user experience goes. You don't need to buy a device or wait for your telco to build broadband on 3G, and meanwhile there are billions of people online now instead of tens or hundreds of millions. So yes, it's grown a lot bigger, a lot faster. We're standing on the shoulders of giants. This is also why Nvidia can ramp its sales so fast. It's riding on the contract manufacturing base built over the last few decades. That doesn't mean this is a bad comparison. As I wrote a long time ago, unfair comparisons are often the best kind, but you do need to know it's unfair. When you get inside a well-run hypergrowth company like Meta or Google, conversely, you see a lot of very specific and rigorously collected and defined second and third derivative metrics that really tell you how well the product is working and what people are doing. Google famously optimized for response time, which no one else thought was important, and aimed to get people to leave the site quickly, which everyone else thought was bad. A lot of these metrics can also be a positive feedback cycle, making the product itself better. When you reformulate a Google search and try again, or click on the third link and do or don't come back afterwards, you're giving Google signals that make it better, and that's a powerful network effect. It's not clear that any LLM providers are really able to leverage this kind of thing yet, and what they would measure. If I ask a question and don't try again, was that the right result? Was it wrong, but I thought it was right? Or did I give up and go to Google? It's actually so interesting when I think about myself. I think it's been a long time since I don't make many Google searches. Most of my Google searches are specifically for photos. If I'm reading something on Super Grok, the only reason I'm opening Google sometimes is that I read something on Grok, I read something on ChatGPT or something, and I'm like, oh, what does this thing actually looks like? And then I put that on Google and I would go search it. But I'm not actually making Google searches now. Weekly active users is at least a tangible specific metric. Too many people are still asking consumers and enterprise questions like how do you use AI, or even how you used AI in the last year. There's a definitional problem here. Are you asking about things like ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini, or do you also mean Snapchat filters and Alexa, both powered by machine learning, which we certainly used to call AI? Which do you mean, and which does the person you're asking mean? And even if you agree on definition, who cares if someone has used ChatGPT once? If you ask a giant corporation, do you use AI, and they say yes, do they mean they are rebuilding their invoice processing around an LLM, or that someone in marketing does mock-ups with Midjourney sometimes? Naturally, all these questions come up again for generative AI. OpenAI occasionally reports round numbers for weekly active users, even though Sam Altman, as a former social media founder, is entirely aware that weekly active users is a pretty weak metric. If you're using this once a week, it isn't changing your life. Wow, okay, this is something new. Sam Altman, as a former social media founder, is entirely aware that weekly active user is a pretty weak metric. If you're only using this once a week, it isn't changing your life. It isn't changing your life. What kind of disruption? I made this slide for a presentation I'm giving next week, but I think it's worth picking up and talking about in its own right. What kind of disruption? Everyone knows about disruption. It's pretty common. Also talk about redefining markets and software eating the world, and Airbnb and Uber are the perfect examples where previous generations of tech companies sold software to hotels and taxi companies. Airbnb and Uber use software to create new businesses and to redefine markets. Uber changed what we mean when we say taxi, and Airbnb changed hotels. You can push this point in different directions. Sometimes disruption is much more about new demand than challenging the existing market, or only affects a peripheral business, as happened with Skype. Everything is probably disruptive to someone. Online travel booking was very disruptive to travel agents, but didn't change the fundamentals of airline business, and generative AI will probably be much more disruptive to professional service companies than the cement business. But in each case, it's always easier to shout disruption or AI than to ask what kind. Okay, very interesting. Let's go to this channel. What the hell? Replit annual recurring revenue ARR growth. quickly do a change and come back. All right, we are back. We just had to do a quick laundry. This was a good read on OpenAI, a few choice bits. The company pays a lot of attention to Twitter. If you tweet something related to OpenAI that goes viral, chances are good someone will read about it and consider it. A friend of mine joked this company runs on Twitter vibes. As a consumer company, perhaps that's not so wrong. That's certainly still, I mean, that makes sense. You're getting so much feedback from Twitter. There's certainly still a lot of analytics around usage, user growth, and retention, but the vibes are equally as important. OpenAI changes direction on a dime. This was a thing we valued a lot at Segment. It's much better to do the right thing as you get new information versus decide to stay the course just because you had a plan. It's remarkable that a company as large as OpenAI still maintains the ethos. Google clearly doesn't. The company makes decision quickly, and when deciding to pursue a direction, goes all in. An unusual part of OpenAI is that everything, and I mean everything, runs on Slack. There is no email. I maybe received 10 emails in my entire time there. If you aren't organized, you will find this incredibly distracting. If you curate your channels and notifications, you can make it pretty workable. Wow. Wow. Okay. Okay. Oh, this was very interesting. Why do people care about Windsor? Big tech acquisitions have been illegal since 21. Previous admin put policy in place, but interestingly enough, current admin has continued the status quo. The Bannon Hawley camp of MAGA coalition hate tech. Why do acquisitions matter? Not every company can go public, but there are a percentage of companies that still end up being valuable enough to be acquired by a bigger company. By removing this option, you decrease returns for startup investors, which in turn makes it harder to fundraise, both raising as an entrepreneur and as an investor. Who cares? VCs are rich anyways. Well, the people most impacted by the removal of marginal liquidity provided by acquisitions, entrepreneurs having a hard time raising money that is chasing the marginal dollars, and employees at the companies that don't go public. Entrepreneurs are usually able to do the next thing. This has been happening since 21. Why are people caring now? Well, Jurassic Park, life finds a way. AI boom has big tech in the most intense competition for talent in decades ever. So a new acquisition that's not technically an acquisition has emerged. Basically, it's hire away the AI talent, license the tech. They don't usually care about the tech, and then licensing fee pays out the cap table. Unconventional, but everyone gets paid. Employees, investors, founders. This happened with Meta scale $14 billion deal. But Windsor was a 300-person startup where a high percentage of the employees had joined the last year, so they technically had non-vested. Yet, 12-month cliff. This meant that they did not participate in the windfall. This upset a bunch of Silicon Valley people on Twitter. The SB social contract is you work for a startup and get equity. If the startup does well, acquire an IPO, you make a bunch of money as an employee. This initially seemed to violate it. Seems like the remaining Windsurf team is going to another equivalent startup, Cognition, on favorable terms, but slippery slope. Anyways, that's why everyone was yapping about it. What big tech acquisitions of block the FTC didn't block any? Lol, how do you measure the acquisitions that never happened? If they didn't happen, it's not due to FTC blocking the instances where they did challenge in court. Meta and Wave Unlimited or whatever the code denied FTC and acquisition was allowed through. Were they active with public co-mergers? Yes, but did not block private acquisitions. Semantics, hair splitting. I know the corp dev people who work at these companies. I know the corp dev people who work at these companies. All the back channels were, if you do this, we will block. Fair enough, but seems like an existential leap from the sort of risky climate that an industrial and scientific revolution naturally breaks out of. There's no shortage of ideas, crackpot theories, manias, corporate restructuring, etc. Ultimately, there must be some valuable product that the end consumer will foot the bill without jumping ship. There is another reason to force companies public. What does this accomplish? Companies like SpaceX do have their mode, but they also serve bargaining powers like DoD. Therein is another reason to force companies public, rather than folding them into company culture like Boeing's. Those finances and motives look extremely risky to the end consumer instead. People underestimate how much venture funding relies on acquisition liquidity, not just IPOs. Venture getting torched like this makes me wonder how many funds quietly walk away from pre-seed, seed, risk next cycle. Venture makes investors money. There will be more margin investment as a result. They make money for investors, but that's kind of the point. Investors are covered, fund founders too. It's the employees, especially recent hires who got iced out. If you are early stage talent, betting your career on equity, and these new style exits don't include you, then the startup pitch starts to look like a rigged game. That's where the breakdown begins. More capital might flow in, but the best talent might not. The Windsor employees are joining another company and got accelerated vesting. Interesting. Titan clusters for superintelligence. Oh, there's a little bit of blur happening over here. So interesting how there's a new term called superintelligence. I'm focused on building the most elite and talent dense team in the industry. We are also going to invest hundreds of billions of dollars into compute to build superintelligence. We have the capital from our business to do this. Semi-analysis just reported that Meta is on track to be the first lab to bring a 1 gigawatt plus supercluster online. They're actually building several multi-gigawatt clusters. We're calling the first one Prometheus, and it's coming online in 26. We are building Hyperion, which will be able to scale up to 5 gigawatt over several years. We're building multiple more Titan clusters as well. Just one of these covers a significant part of the footprint of Manhattan. Meta Superintelligence Labs will have industry-leading levels of compute and by far the greatest compute per researcher. Looking forward to working with the top researchers to advance the frontier. So I think this is interesting. You promise that you have the most compute, which means that if you come over here, your research, your 1% improvements, your incremental 1% improvements in research that you will bring will have the largest impact over here because we have the most compute to actually bring it to life and have an impact and have the distribution. We have the capital, we have the distribution, and we will have the impact. ChatGPT EchoStar Dish acquisition likelihood. Whoa, what does that mean? Likelihood? Oh. Copy of conversation between ChatGPT and Anonymous. Someone would acquire EchoStar for Dish wireless spectrum. Seems more valuable than the $8 billion market cap of the company. And this is cool how ChatGPT has made this what do we call it? Very, I forgot what do we call this? Dishwater Spectrum is the most interesting non-story tech right now. A lot of moving pieces, but an unconventional acquire might change the landscape. Signal. Alright, everybody's looking at Signal now. Elon delivering world-class results with Grok 4 while Meta is burning 200 million per engineer is pretty remarkable. People keep underestimating how much top builders want to follow a strong, even if polarizing leader. Vision more than perks, conviction more than consensus. I've yet to meet someone in Meta Gen AI that truly enjoys being there, someone that feels like they want to stay in Meta for a long time because it's such a great place. Wrote blank root, referring to the nearly 2,000-person group that develops Meta's flagship AI model Llama. You will be hard pressed to find someone that really believes in our AI mission. To most, it's not even clear what our mission is. Wow. When the mission is to build future of humanity and colonize the planet, you tend to get people who think about more than pay packages, though they all make a fortune. Yeah, the difference between 10 million versus 100 million shrinks when there is a much larger purpose. Build future of humanity and colonize a planet. Future of humanity, colonize a planet. It's a shame those results are not seen by anyone. It is arguably the least popular model, and the pricing update hasn't done much to improve it. Still uncertain as to what is Grok's niche, coding or consumer grade. Messaging and product are not great at all. Messaging and product, I think this is it. Like Elon's messaging and product, I think that's not something they work on. Like presentation, my buddy, he's a big Elon fan, and even he's like, yeah, I think they literally just showed up. They showed up. They were like, so what are we presenting today? And they just showed up. But yeah, I think what they got going for them is the vision. What they got going for them is the execution, is the results. It's not product or messaging. It's about the vision, the person who is in charge. It is about the distribution as well. They own Twitter. They own super like Grok integration right over here. Grok needs substantive improvement on every aspect across the board, and user experience, usability, clear story, all vividly missing. Good take. Personal antics inside Elon's core company building skills. Best fundraiser in the world. Best person in the US for building at scale physical infrastructure quickly and cheaply. Ability to recruit talented people. Ability to push those people to the breaking point. Best work for their lives. Steve Jobs had 3, 4 and partnered with 3, 4. Ability to recruit talented people. Ability to push those people to the breaking point. Best work for their lives. And partner with Tim Cook for 2. Best person in US for building at-scale physical infrastructure quickly and cheaply. Albeit in different ways, Sam is probably second best in the world on fundraising. Very high on 3, 4, but recent 12 months of departures have been tough. What do you think makes him the best fundraiser? Is that Twitter acquisition or something else? I'm not too familiar with the fundraising aspect of his work. Ability to raise more capital than anyone else for a brand new thing. Look at XAI. Like these categories would love a walk and talk on number 1 as a general thing. What makes someone? Prompting, Bracky. Playing, bracket, reading, great box. Oh, another Signal. Okay. Except on mobile, where most consumers spend time and money. OpenAI to release web browser in challenge to Google Chrome. This is interesting. Like if you're talking complex workflows, I think the problem is if you give your product to the mainstream people who are mostly on, like, to the normies who are mostly just using their phones, they are gonna ask queries like, hey, what recipes should I cook today? But if you are gonna give the same tools and create the same tools for people who work on their laptops, on their monitors, and now they already do complicated things, that's where you're having real breakthroughs, because these are the people, like for the normies, we have already crushed AI. like whatever they want. Like, okay, here's a picture of my fridge, tell me what should I cook. Hey, I'm sick, like I I was really sick, and I was like, I think I had sore throat, and I was just constantly coughing and I couldn't sleep. So I was like, hey, I'm constantly coughing, what should I do? And it's like, hey, don't lay flat, lay on a pillow. And now I solved the problem, and that was amazing. But the real money, the real breakthroughs now are going to happen in the complex workflows, like solving problems that the PhDs, the smartest people in the world, are trying to solve. Because the phones, the mobile phones, where the mainstream people hang out and the kind of queries they have, we already met the level. OpenAI released web browser in challenge to Google Chrome. This was July 9, 2025. Okay. This is the oldest plain tech. Find PMF with a single killer use case, then vertically integrate and horizontally expand until you control the interface layer itself. App to platform. Once you own the interface, you own the defaults. Welcome to the next generation of browser. This is the oldest plain tech. Find PMF. Find PMF with a single killer use case, then vertically integrate and horizontally expand until you control the interface layer itself. App to platform. Once you own the interface, you own the defaults. He's so smart, but sometimes I feel like he just quick twitch, quote, tweets his reactions without taking the extra 2 minutes to think it through. This is one of those cases. He's so smart, but sometimes I feel like he just quick twitch, quote, tweets his reactions without taking extra 2 minutes to think it through. This is one of those cases. I think desktop knowledge workers will try it out, but Google has more distribution and will copy. Gemini is a good model. They can make their mobile app a browser as well. Don't get much usage. Who uses browsers on mobile to connect wallets though? Most wallets now have in-app browser, and innovation there would be great. Most consumers do not use crypto. Most consumers use the default browser or the in-app browser inside of Instagram or TikTok. The gang learns about private company shareholder agreements and transfer restrictions. I wonder what the CFOs of private companies think about tokenized shares, and what courts will think if the shareholder agreements have transfer restrictions. Are the shares actually derivatives? These OpenAI tokens are not OpenAI equity. We did not partner with Robinhood. We were not involved in this and do not endorse it. Any transfer of OpenAI equity requires our approval. We did not approve any transfer. Please be careful. The gang learns about private company shareholder agreements and transfer restrictions. It's not even a ROFR, it's simply the company controls all transfer stock. It's very interesting. They're like, hey, OpenAI tokens, these OpenAI tokens are not OpenAI equity. We did not partner with Robinhood. We're not involved in this and we do not endorse it. Any transfer of OpenAI equity requires our approval. We did not approve any transfer. So there are like strong transfer restrictions. So which means that if you invested in our company, we gave you our shares, you cannot just go and sell your shares to anyone. Shortcut launched an early preview today. Cursor for Excel, interesting product and looks well made. Makes sense that someone will build this. Just a question of whether they can beat Microsoft or Google to it. Grammarly acquires email startup Superhuman and AI platform push. Grammarly is fascinating business to me in a post-AI world. I would have expected it to go the way of Check, but they have clearly figured out something with respect to distribution. Now they purchase the ultra lux email startup Superhuman, shooting for an all-in-one work suite play a la Notion. Another signal. Okay. Apple weighs using Anthropic or OpenAI to power Siri in major reversal. Absolutely astonishing. Apple used to own the full stack silicon to software to services. Now they're outsourcing the one layer that will define the next decade of computing. It's a metaphysical betrayal of their own DNA. OpenAI and Anthropic don't need Apple, but Apple. Plenty of counterexamples: Intel, Silicon, Google Maps, Qualcomm, Modem, Nuance powering Siri. Signal is smart, so no knock on him, but the take that not getting AI is existential for Apple is wrong. Consumers are not going to give up their iPhones, especially if 80% of the benefit for frontier models are, if 80% of the benefit for frontier models are all available via apps on their iPhones. The mythical unicorn new AI device won't work because messaging, camera won't be good enough. Manufacturing consumer grade piece of hardware with good battery life and build quality 2025 is still extremely difficult. Apple can do nothing on AI for the next couple of years and then do a good enough job with power of default privilege, system access, and be fine. The device that would replace an iPhone from another company. Sam and Johnny have a short barrier to entry, has never been lower, whole paradigm is on the table. They don't have any experience building hardware. Blockchain babe. Blockspace babe. Uber talks with its founder Travis Kalanick to fund self-driving car deal. Uber is in talk with its founder. This is kind of funny. It's like, yeah, we are in talk with our founder. We're talking to our founder. It should say ex-founder or... Oh no, I think founder makes sense. Right. But this line is kind of weird. Taxi service Waymo gains momentum. Local maxima. Everything looks the same. Meta, Perplexity, Grok. This collab would break all the short form tech social networks. New follower. Waymo versus Tesla Robotaxi. O3 did this analysis. It originally had Waymo OPEX ride higher, but I asked it to assume the same. Where do we think this is wrong? Capital intensity versus speed. Tesla recovers capex 3x faster, 20 million budget, funds 100 Teslas versus 20 Waymos, favoring Tesla in fleet-wide cash flow for 4 to 5 years. Long run upside. After amortization, each Waymo out-earns a Tesla by $110 per day, provided utilization fair premium persists. Waymo becomes economically compelling if it can sustain higher throughput and pricing, lower sensor suite capex, or achieve longer service with minimal residual value loss. Two things can be true. ChatGPT has scaled extraordinarily well. This chart is dumb since other apps cited were already at scale and don't have that many new users. Calvin French-Owen. I left OpenAI 3 weeks ago. I had joined the company back in May 24. Oh, back in May 24. That's just 1 year. I wanted to share my reflections because there's a lot of smoke and noise around what OpenAI is doing, but not a lot of first-hand accounts of what the culture of working there actually feels like. Nabil Qureshi has an amazing post called Reflections on Palantir, where he ruminates on what made Palantir special. I wanted to do the same for OpenAI while it's fresh in my mind. You won't find any trade secrets here, more just reflections on this current iteration of one of the most fascinating organizations in history at an extremely interesting time. I think I know who Nabil Qureshi is. Yes. He didn't mention OpenAI over there as well. To put it upfront, there wasn't any personal drama in my decision to leave. In fact, I was deeply conflicted about it. It's hard to go from being a founder of your own thing to an employee at a 3,000 person organization. Right now, I'm craving a fresh start. It's entirely possible that the quality of the work will draw me back. It's hard to imagine building anything as impactful as AGI, and LLMs are easily the technological innovation of the decade. I feel lucky to have seen some of the developments firsthand and also been a part of the Codex launch. Obviously, there aren't these aren't the views of the company as observations. They are my own. OpenAI is a big place, and this is a little window into it. Culture. The first thing to know about OpenAI is how quickly it's grown. When I joined, the company was a little over 1,000 people. 1 year later, it is over 3,000. I was in the top 30% by tenure. Nearly everyone in leadership is doing a drastically different job than they were 2-3 years ago. Of course, everything breaks when you scale that quickly. How to communicate as a company, the reporting structures, how to ship product, how to manage and organize people, the hiring processes, teams vary significantly in culture. Some are sprinting flat out all the time. Others are babysitting big runs. Some are moving along at a much more consistent pace. There's no single open experience, and research applied and GTM operate on very different time horizons. Research applied and GTM. An unusual part of OpenAI is that everything, and I mean everything, runs on Slack. There is no email I received. I maybe received 10 emails in my entire time there. If you aren't organized, you will find this incredibly distracting. If you create your channels and notifications, you can make it pretty workable. Incredibly bottoms up, especially in research. When I first showed up, I started asking questions about the roadmap for the next quarter. The answer I got was, this doesn't exist, though now it does. Good ideas can come from anywhere, and it's often not really clear which ideas will prove most fruitful ahead of time. Rather than a grand master plan, progress is iterative and uncovered as new research bears fruit. Progress is iterative and uncovered as new research bears fruit. Thanks to this bottoms-up culture, OpenAI is also very meritocratic. Historically, leaders in the company are promoted primarily based on their ability to have good ideas and then execute upon them. Many leaders who were incredibly competent weren't very good at things like presenting at all hands or political maneuvering. That matters less at OpenAI than it might at other companies. The best ideas do tend to win. Many leaders who were incredibly competent weren't very good at things like presenting at all hands or political maneuvering. That is so interesting. There's a strong bias to action. You can just do things. It wasn't unusual for similar teams, but unrelated teams to converge on various ideas. I started out working on a parallel but internal effort similar to ChatGPT connectors. There must have been 3 to 4 different Codex prototypes floating around before we decided to push for a launch. These efforts are usually taken by a small handful of individuals without asking permission. Teams tend to quickly form around them as they show promise. Without asking permission, teams tend to quickly form around them as they show promise. And Andre, the Codex lead, used to tell me that you should think of researchers as their own mini executive. There is a strong bias to work on your own thing and see how it pans out. There is a corollary here. Most research gets done by nerds sniping a researcher into a particular problem. If something is considered boring or solved, it probably won't get worked on. Good research managers are insanely impactful and also incredibly limited. The best ones manage to connect the dots between many different research efforts and bring together a bigger model training. The same goes for great PMs. Shout out AE. The ChatGPT EMs I worked with, Akshay, Rizo, Sulman, were some of the coolest customers I've ever seen. Really felt like they had everything. They had seen everything at this point. Most of them were relatively hands-on, but hired good people and tried to make sure they were set up for success. OpenAI changed direction on a dime. This was a thing we valued a lot at Segment. It's much better to do the right thing as you get new information versus to decide to stay the course just because you had a plan. It's remarkable that a company as large as OpenAI still maintains the ethos Google clearly doesn't. The company makes decisions quickly, and when deciding to pursue a direction goes on, and there's no scrutiny on the company coming from a B2B enterprise background. This was a bit of a shock to me. I regularly see news stories broken in the press that hadn't yet been announced internally. Or tell people I work at OpenAI and be met with a Brief form opinion on the company. A number of Twitter users run automated bots. We check to see if there are new feature launches coming up. As a result, OpenAI is a very secretive place. I couldn't tell anyone what I was working on in detail. There's a handful of Slack workspaces with the previous permissions. Revenue and burn numbers are more closely guarded. OpenAI is also a more serious place than you might expect, in part because the stakes feel really high. On the one hand, there's the goal of building AGI, which means there's a lot to get right. On the other hand, you're trying to build a product that hundreds of millions of users leverage for everything from medical advice to therapy. And on the other hand, the company is competing in the biggest arena in the world. We would pay close attention to what was happening at Meta, Google, and Anthropic, and I'm sure they were all doing the same. All of the major world governments are watching the space with a keen interest. As often as OpenAI is maligned in the press, everyone I met is actually trying to do the right thing. Given the consumer focus, it is the most visible of the big labs, and consequently there's a lot of slander for it. That said, you probably shouldn't view OpenAI as a single monolith. I think OpenAI is an organization that started like Los Alamos. It was a group of scientists and tinkerers investigating the cutting edge of science. That group happened to accidentally spawn the most wild consumer app in the history, and then grew to have ambitions to sell to governments and enterprises. People of different tenure and different parts of the org subsequently have very different goals and viewpoints. The longer you've been there, the more you probably view things through the research lab or non-profit for good lens. The thing that I appreciate most is that it walks the walk in terms of distributing the benefits of AI. Cutting edge models aren't reserved for some enterprise grade tier with an annual agreement. Anybody in the world can jump onto ChatGPT and get an answer, and even if they aren't logged in. There's an API you can sign up and use, and most of the models, even if SOTA or proprietary, tend to quickly make it into API for startups to use. You could imagine an alternate regime that operates very differently from the one beyond today. OpenAI deserves a ton of credit for this, and it's still core to the DNA of the company. Safety is actually more of a thing than you might guess. If you read a lot from Zvi or less wrong, there's a large number of people working to develop safety systems. Given the nature of OpenAI, saw more focus on practical risk, hate speech abuse, manipulating political biases, crafting bioweapons, self-harm, prompt injection, than theoretical ones, intelligence explosion, power seeking. That's not to say that nobody's working on the latter. There's definitely people focusing on the theoretical risk, but from my viewpoint, it's not the focus. Most of the work which is done isn't published, and OpenAI really should do more to get it out there. Unlike other companies which freely hand out their swag at every career fair, OpenAI doesn't really give much swag even to new employees. Instead, there are drops which happen where you can order in stock items. The first one brought down the Shopify store. It had so much demand. There was an internal post which circulated on how to post the right JSON payloads and circumvent this. Nearly everything is a rounding error compared to GPU cost. To give you a sense, a niche feature that was built as part of the Codex product had the same GPU cost footprint as our entire segment infrastructure. Not the same scale as ChatGPT, but saw a decent portion of internet traffic. OpenAI is perhaps the most frighteningly ambitious org I have ever seen. You might think that having one of the top consumer apps on the planet might be enough, but there's a desire to compete across dozens of arenas: the API product, deep research, hardware, coding agents, image generation, and a handful of others which haven't been announced. It's a fertile ground for taking ideas and running with them. The company pays a lot of attention to Twitter. If you tweet something related to OpenAI that goes viral, chances are good someone will read about it and consider it. A friend of mine joked this company runs on Twitter vibes. As a consumer company, perhaps that's not so wrong. There's certainly still a lot of analytics around usage, user growth, and retention, but the vibes are equally as important. Teams in OpenAI are much more fluid than they might be elsewhere. When launching Codex, we needed some help from a few experienced ChatGPT engineers to hit our launch date. We met with some of the ChatGPT AMs to make the request. The next day, we had two badass folks ready to dive in and help. There was no waiting for quarterly planning or reshuffling headcount. It moved really quickly. Leadership is quite visible and heavily involved. This might be obvious at a company such as OpenAI, but every exec seemed quite dialed in. You would see GDB, Sama, KW, Mark, Dane, and all chime in regularly on Slack. There are no absentee leaders. Code. OpenAI uses a giant mono repo, which is mostly Python, though there is a growing set of Rust services and a handful of Golang services sprinkled in for things like network proxies. This creates a lot of strange looking code because there are so many ways you can write Python. You will encounter both libraries designed for scale from 10-year Google veterans as well as a throwaway Jupyter notebooks from newly minted PhDs. Pretty much everything operates around fast API to create APIs and Pydantic for validation, but there aren't style guides enforced writ large. OpenAI runs everything on Azure. What's funny about this is there are exactly 3 services that I would consider trustworthy: Azure Kubernetes Service, Cosmos DB, Azure's document storage, and Blob Store. There's no true equivalents for Dynamo, Spanner, Bigtable, BigQuery, Kinesis, or Aurora. It's a bit rare to think a lot in auto scaling units. The IAM implementations tend to be way more limited than what you might get from an AWS, and there's a strong bias to implement in-house. I don't know what this means. I think, are they saying that because they are using Azure, because they have this partnership with Microsoft and they're using Azure, does that limit them in some way? When it comes to personnel, at least in Edge, there's a very significant meta to OpenAI pipeline. In many ways, OpenAI resembles early meta blockbuster consumer app nascent infra and a desire to move really quickly. Most of the infra talent I've seen brought over from Meta plus Instagram has been quite strong. Meta and Instagram. Okay. Put these things together and you see a lot of core parts of infra that feel reminiscent of Meta. There was an in-house implementation of Tau, an effort to consolidate auth identity at the edge, and I'm sure a number of others I don't know about chat runs really deep. A lot of code base is structured around the idea of chat messages and conversation. These primitives are so baked at this point. You should probably ignore them at your own peril. We did deviate from them a bit in Codex, but we leverage a lot of prior art. Code wins rather than having some central architecture or planning committee decisions that are typically made by whichever team plans to do the work. Result is that there's a strong bias for action, often a number of duplicate parts of the code base. I must have seen half a dozen libraries for things like queue management or agent loops. There were a few areas where having a rapidly scaled edge team, not a lot of tooling created issues. Saw a server, the backend monolith was a bit of a dumping ground. CI broke a lot more frequently than you might expect on master. Test cases, even running in parallel and factoring in a subset of dependencies, could take 30 minutes to run on GPUs. These weren't unsolvable problems, but it's a good reminder that these sorts of problems exist everywhere and they are likely to get worse when you scale super quickly. To the credit of the internal teams, there's a lot of focus going into improving this story. Other things I learned: what a big consumer brand looks like. I hadn't really internalized this until we started working on Codex. Everything is measured in terms of pro subs. Even for a product like Codex, we thought of the onboarding primarily related to individual usage rather than teams. It broke my brain a bit coming from predominantly B2B enterprise background. You flip a switch and you get traffic from day one. How large models are trained at a high level. There's a spectrum from experimentation to engineering. Most ideas start out as small-scale experiments. If the results look promising, they then get incorporated into a bigger run. Experimentation is as much about tweaking the core algorithms as it is tweaking the data mix and carefully studying the results on the large end. Doing a big run almost looks like giant distributed systems engineering. There will be weird edge cases and things you didn't expect. It's up to you to debug them. How to do GPU math. We had to forecast out the load capacity requirements as part of the Codex launch, and doing this was the first time I had really spent benchmarking any GPUs. The gist is that you should actually start from the latency requirements you need: overall latency, number of tokens, time to first token, versus doing bottoms-up analysis on what a GPU can support. Every new model iteration can change the load patterns vividly. How to work in a large Python code base. Segment was a combination of both microservices and was mostly Golang and TypeScript. We didn't really have the breadth of code that OpenAI does. I learned a lot about how to scale a code base based upon the number of developers contributing to it. You have to put in a lot more guardrails for things like works by default, keep masters clean, and hard to misuse. Was launching Codex. It's unquestionably one of the highlights of my career. To set the stage, back in November 24, set a 2025 goal to launch a coding agent by Feb 25. We had a few internal tools floating around, which were using the models to great effect, and we were feeling the pressure to launch a coding specific agent. Clearly, the models had gotten to the point where they were getting really useful for coding, seeing the new explosion of vibe coding tools in the market. I returned early from my paternity leave to help participate in the Codex launch. A week after I returned, we had a slightly chaotic merger of two teams and began a mad dash sprint from start. The first lines of code written to finish. The whole product was built in just 7 weeks. The Codex sprint was probably the hardest I've worked in nearly a decade. Most nights were up until 11 or midnight, waking up to a newborn at 5:30 every morning, heading to the office again at 7 a.m. Working most weekends. We all pushed hard as a team because every week counted. It reminded me of being back at YC. It's hard to overstate how incredible this level of pace was. I haven't seen organizations large or small go from an idea to a fully launched, freely available product in such a short window. The scope wasn't small either. We built a container runtime, made optimizations on repo, downloading, fine-tuned a custom model to deal with code edits, handled all manner of Git operations, introduced a completely new surface area, enabled internet access, and ended up with a product that was generally a delight to use. Say what you will, OpenAI still has that launching spirit. The good news is that the right people can make magic happen. We were a senior team of 8 engineers, 4 researchers, 2 designers, 2 GTM, and a PM. Had we not had that group, I think we would have failed. Nobody needed much direction, but we did need a decent amount of coordination. If you get the chance to work with anyone on the Codex team, know that every one of them is fantastic. The night before launch, 5 of us stayed up until 4 a.m. trying to deploy the main monolith. Then it was back to the office for the 8 a.m. launch announcement and live stream. You had a 4-hour sleep. We turned on the flags and started to see the traffic pour in. I've never seen a product get so much immediate uptick just from appearing in a left sidebar, but that's the power of ChatGPT. Wow. I don't see my codex over here. Where's my codex? I don't see my codex. I don't know this one. In terms of the product shape, it's kind of inspiring to read. Very inspiring to read. In terms of the product shape, we settled on a form factor which was entirely asynchronous. Unlike tools like Cursor at the time, it's not supposed to similar mode or Claude Code, we aim to allow users to kick off tasks and let the agent run in its own environment. Our bet was in the end game, users should treat a coding agent like a coworker. They would they would send messages to the agent and it gets some time to do its work and then it comes back with a PR. This was a bit of a gamble. We are in a slightly weird state today where the models are good but not great. They can work for minutes at a time but not yet hours. Users have wide varying degrees of trust in the model's capabilities. And we are not yet clear what the true capabilities of the models are over the long arc of time. I do believe most programming will look more like Codex. In the meantime, it's going to be interesting to see how all the products unfold. Codex, maybe unsurprisingly, is really good at working in a large code base, understanding how to navigate it. The biggest differentiator I've seen versus other tools is the ability to kick off multiple tasks at once and compare their output. I recently saw that there are public numbers comparing the PRs made by different LLM agents. Just at the public numbers, Codex has generated 630,000 PRs. That's about 78,000 PRs per engineer in the 53 days since launch. You can make your own guesses about the multiple of private PRs. I'm not sure I worked on something so impactful in my life. Parting thoughts. Truth be told, I was originally apprehensive about joining OpenAI. I wasn't sure what it would be like to sacrifice my freedom to have a boss, to be a much smaller piece of a much larger machine. I kept it fairly low-key that I had joined just in case it wasn't the right fit. I didn't want to get 3 things from the experience: to build intuition for how the models were trained and where the capabilities were going, to work with and learn from amazing people, to launch a great product. In reflecting on the year, I think it was one of the best moves I've ever made. It's hard to imagine learning more anywhere else. If you're a founder and feeling like your startup really isn't going anywhere, you should either deeply reassess how you can take more shots on goal or go join one of the big labs. Right now is an incredible time to build, but it's also an incredible time to peer into where the future is headed. As I see the path of AGI is a 3-horse race right now: OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google. Each of these organizations are going to take a different path to get there. Wow. It's crazy. Why are they not mentioning Grok? Why are they not mentioning Meta, Llama? Each of these organizations are going to take a different path to get there based upon their DNA, consumer versus business versus rock solid infra plus data. Working at any of them will be an eye-opening experience. Thank you to Leah for being incredibly supportive and taking the majority of the childcare throughout the late nights. Thank you to Leah. Yes, thank you to your wife. You cannot do this amount of work having a newborn without having a strong partner. Thanks to PW, GDB, and Rizzo for giving me a shot. Thanks to the SA teammates for teaching me the ropes: Andrew, Anu, Bill, Jeremy, Quaz, Ming, Simon, Tony, and Mel. Thanks to the Codex core team for giving me the ride of a lifetime: Alban A, Andre, Brian, Channing, David K, Gabe, Gladstone, Hanson, Joey, J, Josh, Katie, Kevin, T, Max, Sabrina, SQ, Tebow, TC, and Will. I'll never forget this print. Fam. It's easy to try and read into a lot of drama whenever there's a departing leader, but I would chalk 70% of them up to this fact alone. Wait, what is this? I don't think we are on a slight phase issue. There's a lot of senior leadership hires being made from outside the company. I'm generally in favor of this. I think the company benefits a lot from infusing new external DNA. We saw some big hires at Meta a few weeks ago. XAI launched Grok 4, which performs well on benchmarks. Mira and Ilya both have great talent. Maybe that will change things. The people are good, and they have some catching up to do. Calvin French-Owen. Making things trail running. Previously, Codex at OpenAI. Matrices, co-founder of Segment. We are now 12U Segment, creating the unquestioned platform of choice for all companies looking to transform their customer engagement. And MIT. Some reflections. As they say, some personal news. Oh, when was this written? July 15th. Oh wow, we're just reading this like 3 days later. Okay. I just left open after launching Codex. Extremely grateful to everyone there who I got the chance to work with and learn from. Still figuring out what's next, but there's a lot left to build out there.